Hello, my friend. I'm here to teach you how to play Empire of the Ants. It's a unique new real-time strategy game where you build and command massive armies of ants and even some other insects as well. This game plays great on a controller. It's kind of designed around it, and it plays great on mouse and keyboard as well. So we're going to talk about both in this video, but I'm going to primarily be using a controller just to show you what that looks like. So let's kick things off with basic movement and controls. You move around with the left stick or WASD, and just keep in mind that you are an ant. You stick to things, you can go upside down, you can climb stuff, you have all the freedom in the world. You can sprint by holding down on shift or by holding down on circle, and you can jump with triangle or by pressing space. Now, you can charge your jump, and you just need to hold down the button to jump further, and you can cancel your charge. So if you're in the middle of a jump charge, but maybe you don't want to actually jump, you can just aim or you can just press sprint and you'll stop doing the jump. And speaking of aiming, you do that by right-clicking on the mouse or by pressing L2 on the controller. You also have 3 different levels of zoom, and you can control that by clicking on the left stick or by tapping C on the keyboard. And sometimes you want to be zoomed out so you can get a better overview of the battlefield, but sometimes you want to zoom in just to see the fun little animations or whatever other stuff you're doing while zoomed in. I don't know. I don't live your life. You do whatever you need to do when you're zoomed in. Yeah. You can also zoom in and out of the minimap with the right stick or M on keyboard. And the final basic control that you want to know, it has to do with your pheromone powers. So at the bottom left of the screen, you have these special powers you can activate. You can control those with the D-pad on a controller or just follow the button prompts on keyboard. We'll talk more about these powers later. Now let's move on to the resources and general UI. So in the top right is where you can see your food and wood resources. And these are the things that you need to build new units, to build new structures. These are the 2 resources that you want to maintain throughout the course of a game. Under the big number in the top right, you can see what the cap for them is, and this can be increased by building specific structures. Now, if we look at the bottom center of the screen, this is where your created units go, and the game calls them legions actually. So the way you want to select them is with bumpers on a controller, so R1, L1, or Q and E on PC. But if you're just feeling like you want to select every single legion you've created, you can just hit both bumpers at the same time, or you can hit tab on the keyboard. Moving on now, at the bottom right is your minimap, and it gives you important information about the battlefield, but you don't start with a minimap. It's actually an upgrade that you have to build at a nest. Again, we'll talk about that in just a sec. So if you want to interact with any of these, just aim and point at the thing that you want to interact with. For example, for nests, you can see what structures they currently have. For enemy troops, you can send, your troops to attack them. The game is played by you aiming at these icons. Now that I'm saying that out loud, I'm also realizing it's not 100% true. You can send your troops wherever you want. So once you have a troop or multiple troops selected, what you want to do is just aim and then left mouse click or R2 to basically send your troops wherever you want them to go. It's just that if you want them to go to very specific points of interest or attack enemy troops, the best way of doing that is by aiming at their little icon. Now let's talk about building legions, structures, and more. So when you want to build stuff, you have to go to a nest. You physically have to go there. And you start with your headquarters nest, and you can, expand into other nests over time. So once you're in your nest, you have several different tabs. You have to actually walk over them, select them, and walk over the things you want to create. The Legions tab is where you can train your units, and you can only train 1 legion per nest. Only 5 legions can be trained to start with, but you can get upgrades that give you more. One thing that's pretty cool is that you can speed up the production of your legion with resources. So let's say you set a legion to be built. If you then select that legion from the UI at the bottom using the bumpers, if you remember, you can spend resources, food, and the more you spend, the quicker that unit's going to be built. So this is something important to keep in mind because sometimes you'll end up in scenarios where maybe you just lost a legion or 2, but you need to get back into the fight immediately. So now you can spend food to immediately train those guys back up to, what am I even saying? Back up to speed, back up to existence. Anyway, as you continue to build more upgrades and tech up and become, stronger, you can also upgrade your own units just by staring at the nest that they were built at. And you can follow the button on screen to just make your unit better, take it to the next level. Moving on now, let's talk about the economy tab, which gives you access to both resource generating structures, but also permanent upgrades. This is the tab where you're eventually going to be teching up from, and you want to be doing that because that way you will unlock all the things that you can build to make your empire stronger and better. And in order to tech up, you'll need to construct a chemical lab and then eventually a chemical library. And once you have both of them, you'll be at the final tech level 3, indicated in the top right of the screen. And this means that, hey, you can build anything that's available, as long as you have the resources for it, of course. Now let's move on to the defense tab, which is where you can build fortifications for your nest, ranging from walls to different kinds of guards. These help your nests stay alive while being attacked, and it's very important to reinforce nests that you think are in a dangerous spot, because you need that precious time to move your units around the map if you're under attack, or you just need firepower against the enemy. Maybe they're not sending something particularly strong, and maybe your nest can just take it out on its own. By the way, when you build walls for your nest, you can actually manually speed them up by spending some of your wood resource. So you just select the wall to be built, you walk up to that wall, and you push the button it tells you on screen, and you'll just speed that up. It's pretty cool. One thing you have to remember is that everything you build costs resources and takes up space. So when you go to build something, it's telling you on screen, this is how much it will cost, this is how much space it will take up. And nests have a very limited amount of space. So when you look at a nest by, pointing, aiming at its icon, it will show you little squares indicating how much space there is. So you have to keep in mind, like, hey, I can't build everything in one nest. I have to spread my builds across my empire. Now let's talk about the powers tab. This is the tab where you can research pheromone powers, and they're super useful because not only can they give you buffs and heals to your troops, but they can also help you get around the map faster. For example, with the burrow ability, you can kind of teleport, if you will, to any one of your nests. That's super handy. With other abilities, you can move your units, faster across the map. You can make them more powerful. You definitely don't want to ignore this tab. Powers are super important to the game. You also have the information tab, which is super important because you need to build the mini-map through it. And it also just has other information-related upgrades and powers that you're going to want to look into. Now let's move on to combat, capturing nests as well as food. So combat has a rock, paper, scissors adjacent quality to it. What I mean here is that each core unit has a strength and a disadvantage. So for example, warriors beat workers, workers beat gunners, gunners beat warriors. And in terms of the units themselves, warriors are your typical melee combat unit. Now workers, they can actually extract food from resources that other units can't. So if you send a worker to a pear, for example, they can strip the flesh from that pear, they can bring it back to base, but they do have to make that, traveling line just like ants do. It doesn't immediately get added to your resources. Workers have to actually physically carry food into your nest, whereas warriors and gunners can't do that. You can think of gunners, by the way, as your archers. They are ants that spit acid. They're also super fancy predator units like beetles, and they have no technical weaknesses, but they cost a lot of time, they cost a lot of resources, and you can't just keep building them. They're kind of like your hero units. Now, if you want to fight enemies or try to capture specific nests, what you need to do is select your units and simply point them in direction of that little icon that's above the enemy, that's above the nest, that's above the thing that you want to attack or interact with. And really, you're going to want to keep capturing nests so that you can keep building more and more stuff. More nests means more economy and more units, and just keep in mind that you have to build upgrades to get more than 5 legions. Now, one thing to note is that you can also make different combat groups to split your armies into multiple smaller armies, and this can help you get more control over your units if you don't want to just send your entire army into one location. On a controller, you can do this by tapping select while highlighting a unit that you want to send into a group, and then you can add to that group by selecting another unit again, and you can move them around with the bumpers into different groups themselves. Eventually, if you're feeling like you want to disband a group, you just have to keep holding the select button on that group, and eventually it will go back into your main army. Okay, so now you know how Empire of the Ants works and how to control the game and how to play it, but I'm going to give you some tips here in no particular order that you should know, because although the game is pretty simple to play, right? Like, it's easy to pick up, it is difficult to master, and there is a lot going on when you get into it, especially as you build a bigger army, especially as you're fighting multiple opponents. So here are 10 tips you need to know in no particular order. Starting with number 1, let's talk about the early game. You want to be sure to scout the map as much as you possibly can early on, because having the information about where everything is on the map is crucial. It will help you plan out your moves, plan out your goals, plan out everything. And the more information you have, the more power you will have by using it. Tip number 2, don't neglect your pheromone powers. Build lots of them and use them often. They can have huge impacts on battles, and you can do everything from moving your units quicker to making them stronger to healing them. So don't be stingy with your pheromone powers. They're there to be used. That's what they're there for. Tip number 3, expand, expand, expand. Don't be shy. You're always basically going to need more nests if you want to keep growing your empire. So you can, you can play more defensively, focusing on defensive structures for your nests, that kind of thing, but you still need to capture more and more nests. Tip number 4, legions can become locked in melee combat until it's finished. So think carefully before you issue an attack order, before you commit to a fight. It's possible you end up in a situation where you go to a fight, but you want to pull back, but you're locked into it now. Tip number 5, make sure you invest in defenses for your HQ and near your opponent where possible, or just nests that you think have some strategic value or, might be getting targeted by your opponent. Making your nests difficult to capture is going to buy you so much time. It's going to make your life a whole lot easier. Tip number 6, always build a super predator unit when you can. They have no real drawbacks other than their cost and time, but they can be huge difference makers in many battles. Tip number 7, don't forget that you need to build an upgrade for a mini-map. It's in your information tab in your nest, and it's not going to be built by itself. Tip number 8, also don't forget, if you want to tech up to the highest possible tech level, you need a chemical lab and a chemical library, which does take a lot of resources. But having both of these will enable you to build anything and everything. Tip number 9, make sure you build upgrades for your pheromone powers. You'll get more charges that way, and they'll be more potent that way as well. Use those powers, upgrade those powers, hell yeah. And tip number 10, just stay away from water. You'll drown, it's no good. Ants are not Michael Phelps. I know popular opinion is that ants are definitely Michael Phelps, or that Michael Phelps is the world's most successful ant, but it's just not true. It's a conspiracy. Don't believe the lies. Folks, thank you so much for checking out my guide to Empire of the Ants here. If you learned something new or if you had a good time, be sure to hit like, subscribe, hype, whatever other YouTube things, notification bell, all that good stuff. It tells me you enjoyed the video. It tells me you want more. Have a lovely day, and I'll see you next time.